a shot to shine. It's more games and a lot more fun. Starting with 12, counting down to 1. That's how we crown a CFP national champion.
Welcome to the TryPod. Happy holidays, guys. If you are on holidays, it's going to be a college football playoff extravaganza show today. It all kicks off Saturday, Aussie time. I know that's a change of pace and not a sport that we do often on the TryPod, but funnily enough, it's actually coming around to nearly 10 years to the day where we did the first ever test TryPod, December 2014, and Alex and I previewed the upcoming college football bowl games. So this is a historic season. There's some great games coming up, and what better time than to get amongst it? I've got my favorite head-to-head bet for the weekend. I've got my favorite prop bet. I've got an exacta. I'm going to actually show you my entire playoff bracket. I'm going to fill out the bracket behind you and tell you my pick in every round. $17 exacta and a custom multi that I've cooked up as well. So I know that this is only going to appeal to a small portion of our audience, but for me, I just love college football. I've sprinkled my picks in over the years in any games I've really liked each and every summer. And if just a few people who follow the pod enjoy this over their holiday, I love talking about it. So let's do it. And as I said before, it's a special season because it is the first ever expanded playoff, which does make it extra exciting. 8 big games over 4 more rounds, and over the next kind of month of action. If you love your college football, please join the discussion. Let me know what you think. And if you're new to it or casual, let me try and bring you up to speed. Hopefully I can help you understand and give some bets out as well that I feel could be good to ride along the way. Well, I just want to talk about a little bit of background in terms of college football. And again, comment if you can see me and hear me as always, just to make sure, because it is a solo pod. So hopefully it's coming through smooth and going all right. But the thing about college football, which makes it unique to almost any other sport in the world, it is pretty much a professional sport at this point with NIL. But there's 130 Division I teams. But in a season, they only play about 13 games. So you don't play close to everybody else. And that's what makes it different and difficult to actually decide who deserves to play off at the end of the year and be called the best team and be called the national champion. So for decades, it was basically various college football publications would just rank the teams based on their schedule and their results and just say who they thought was the best team in the country. And those schools, if they got ranked number 1, they would claim that as they were national champions for that year. And it wasn't until 1998 where they brought in the BCS, where they would use coach polls, media, I think computer rankings as well. And they would, from that, derive the best 2 teams. And then those 2 teams would play off for the national championship, which was still contentious because when you've got 130 teams, are you sure you're getting the best 2 teams in that game every time? In 2014, which is 10 years ago as well, they expanded to a 4-team playoff chosen by a committee, which I think has definitely been an improvement for people who follow college football. But of course, there's always still hot debates who deserves to be in the 4. But what I have found interesting, I think you go back the last 10 years, there's been multiple times where a 4 seed or a 3 seed has beaten 1 and 2 and won it. So it goes to show with the earlier systems, those sides would not have even got a chance to play for the championship, and they ended up proving to be the best team in college. And this year, as you can see behind me, if you're watching this as a video, you can see that the playoff has expanded to 12 teams. And as I said before, it kicks off Saturday, Aussie time. I'm going to probably speak about my time, which is in Queensland. If you're enjoying daylight savings, it's going to be an hour later. I'll just say check your local guides. I've got some odds that are going to come up on the screen from Toppy, and I think they use the daylight saving time. So be aware, as I say, check your local listing just to be sure. I think just about all these games are on ESPN, but another great way to follow college football, there are very comprehensive highlights packages that are put up on YouTube soon after the games. And in fact, you can pretty much find live streams of these games on YouTube as well. You don't even have ESPN. You can tap into the games too. So another thing I wanted to mention just before I go game by game, you're going to see 2 numbers beside each team. So I'm going to talk about the seeding, all right? The teams are seeded 1 to 12. Now, that is slightly different to their ranking because the rank was attempting to order the sides in terms of the strongest to weakest. But the seeding has some extra factors in there to reward conference champions. So it has created a pretty lopsided draw, which I think we can use to our advantage from a punting perspective. But I will just refer to the team seed rather than the team ranking. It is a topic that you could spend a whole podcast debating on what rank should everybody be, what seed should everyone have gotten, who should have gotten into this top 12. They claim that the committee is trying to pick the best 12 teams, but I would argue it actually shouldn't be the best 12, because if you have a team that's really good and really loaded, but has a disappointing year, loses a few close games, I would say they didn't deserve to get in. I think you do want to reward wins. And if a team, wins 12 out of 13 games, even if they had easier opponents, I can't put in another side that's 8-4, even if I know the 8-4 team would be favoured over the 12-1 side. So I think you've got to try and pick the most deserving teams. But the massive disparity in college football is just the conferences, and some are so much stronger than others. And it means that some teams play such an easier schedule than others. And for that reason, I think I could sit here straight away and say there's at least 3 SEC teams that probably are in the best 12 but didn't make the playoff. Perhaps Miami as well from the ACC. But they wanted to reward schools that won their conference. And as a result, this is what we've ended up with. But as I say before, that's a debate that many other podcasts can have, and you can spend plenty of time on that. And as I said before, the quirks of if you win a Power 4 conference, or if you were the highest ranked Group of 5 conference winner, you had the opportunity for a top 4 seed. And for that reason, we have a couple of teams that are actually going to get a bye and not play this weekend that nobody thinks are amongst the best 4 sides. And that really has created a lopsided draw, as I said before. And I'm going to get into all that. And when it comes to executing futures, my custom multi, how my bracket plays out. It's a shocking draw for some teams, and it's a really friendly draw for others. So we'll get into all that. But why don't we just jump straight into the games? I'll bring it up here. I'll shuffle to the side. So where do we begin? 11 a.m. Queensland time. 1 hour later, as I said, if you're in daylight savings, we've got in-state rivals, if you want to call them that. Indiana is at Notre Dame. Notre Dame are a 7.5-point favourite. Now, while they're both from the state of Indiana, I heard these teams haven't even played each other for nearly 35 years. Indiana, not a traditional football school, but with Coach Signetti, and he's brought a bunch of players from James Madison with him, and they've had an outstanding year. Indiana, only one loss, led all of college football in points differential. Funnily enough, Notre Dame was second. So this is your 1 and 2 in points differential. And while neither of these teams have a lot of impressive wins in terms of high caliber opponents, they have taken care of business in the softer games, and they've won by, as I said, the biggest margins. And I'm talking Indiana won by an average of 28 points a game. Notre Dame, 26 points a game. I read Indiana has covered the spread on average by 14 a game. So 2 touchdowns a game, beating the spread. But it's Notre Dame who are the 7 seed, and therefore they are at home. And they started the year with a catastrophe. Week 2, they lost to Northern Illinois and looked like that could be their season shot. They had to be perfect the rest of the way, the Fighting Irish, but they actually were. And Notre Dame repaired that resume and has recovered. And actually, if it wasn't for the seeding, Notre Dame had an argument to be, in the top 4. Coming back to, I think, Notre Dame doesn't really play in a conference, so they're a bit of an anomaly. They didn't play a conference game, but they, I think, finished 11-1 or 12-1 with the 21st strength of schedule. Indiana, the 10 seed, they've been polarizing, you could say. They've made use of a very friendly Big Ten schedule. The Big Ten is a pretty strong conference, but Indiana didn't play everyone in that conference and missed a couple of the heavyweights there. And in fact, Indiana only played one ranked opponent all season, and that was Ohio State, who crushed them. But to the Hoosiers' credit, they did win every other game. And actually, if you look at Indiana's record, you're going to notice Indiana beat Michigan this year. Indiana beat Washington. Well, hang on. Those two teams played in the national championship last year. But I would note those sides are very different this year. So those wins weren't actually that impressive. But it's hard. I don't want to go super in-depth every game, and I'm not going to pretend to know like every player, every intricacy. For this game, I just want to talk in general where I would look for a bet. And I feel like both sides could be a little overrated because they are both only one-loss sides. I did back Ohio State when they hosted Indiana, and Ohio State was only a 5-point favorite. And I think Indy came in a bit overrated and then got found out a little bit in that game. After a good start, Ohio State just dominated that one. But it's funny, Indiana probably benefited in a way by losing that game. They didn't make the Big Ten title game, where they probably would have been dealt a second loss. So with only that one loss, Indiana are in the playoff. I still think Notre Dame is stronger, and then I've got to respect the home advantage as well. Although in in-state game, you're going to have a lot of fans from both sides. My issue with Notre Dame, and this is a general principle that I apply in any of my American football betting, I really don't want to bet on teams that have been extremely fortunate when it comes to turnovers. And Notre Dame, first or second in the whole country out of 130 plus teams in terms of turnover margin. Now, it's not all luck. A good team is going to force more turnovers, and a good team is going to give up less for sure. But it still is a variable that you can't rely on being in your favor in the extreme. And to give another example, Notre Dame has benefited from 5 or 6 pick sixes this year. That's something you can't replicate or sustain. So please let me know in the comments if you have a bet on this game or any of the games. When I see two teams potentially overrated, I probably hope one just wins big and gets even more attention, and then that might be a side that I could look to fade down the road. Although when we get to it, and you can probably see that on the bracket in the top right corner, the winner of this game plays Georgia, and I'm actually going to tell you later on this show that I think Georgia is overrated as well, which is one of my most bold takes I want to share. And I feel like you got to have bold opinions to be able to exercise that to find value and bet the opposite direction. So I actually think that whole quadrant is overrated, and I want to fade whoever comes out of that for sure. I would also lean to the over in this game. I haven't got it up on the screen, but I think a lot of these teams have played in Indiana, and Notre Dame played a lot of rushing offenses, haven't played a lot of quality quarterbacks, and we haven't really seen if they can handle a good passing offense, and they could actually present problems to each other. Let's move to Sunday, and this is Aussie time. And now, if you are interested in college football, you're with me so far, you probably love your NFL too. So you're probably aware we've got some extra days play of NFL over the holiday period. We've got a doubleheader on Sunday Aussie time. Look out for what Netty Given Sunday delivers us for those. I'm also looking at a Christmas Eve special show because we've got Boxing Day NBA, we've got Boxing Day NFL now. So I'll deep dive a bit more NFL next week. But my 2 cents on Sunday, I like Texans +3. I don't think Mahomes plays for the Chiefs. I like Ravens -6.5. I think they even the ledger against the Steelers in the AFC North. And speaking of NFL, how about Belichick to North Carolina? How good is that going to be to follow next few years? You can already bet North Carolina's season win total on 365, and I feel like I would just back the over because I think you can change the destiny of a college team so quickly now with transfer portals and the ability to kind of sign players. It's such a different landscape. So I think that they could instantly be a really strong school, and UNC doesn't have that tough of a schedule next year. I digress. Let's get back to the college games. If you're still with me, on Sunday, we have a triple header, 3 a.m. to 11 a.m. Queensland time. As I say, watch it on ESPN, catch the highlights later, catch a live stream on YouTube as well. So Penn State is at SMU. Penn State hosts SMU at Happy Valley, and Penn State are 9.5-point favorites. SMU probably are the most controversial of the 12 teams remaining in terms of whether they're deserving of that spot. And you might ask me, well, if they're 11, then why is that any more controversial than the 12 seed? But the thing is, Clemson got the 12 seed with an automatic bid that they won their conference. In fact, Clemson beat SMU. So Clemson had to get in. But SMU, it was a lot more subjective. And in fact, SMU was down big to Clemson as a favorite, but came all the way back, appeared to send the game to overtime, only for Clemson to nab that title game with a 56-yard field goal. And ultimately, I think the committee decided that SMU showed enough with that fight back that if you lose a conference title game on a final second field goal, we're not going to weight that loss as heavily as a regular season loss. And I get that because not every school plays in a conference title game. So it's a bit harsh if a team only had one loss all season and then somebody's going to lose. It's going to be good teams in the title games, and you're going to double your loss column. And then if that boots you out of the playoff, and I believe SMU was about ranked number 8 going into that weekend. So the committee did not want to penalize sides for losing conference title games. The problem I have with that is I understand it with the power conferences, but SMU didn't beat anybody good all season. SMU played one ranked team all year and they lost. That was BYU. So I actually think you should judge teams from weaker conferences on their title game because it's one of the rare occasions they actually play someone good. And SMU played someone decent like Clemson, who I don't even think is that good, and they lost. So I believe SMU didn't really deserve the spot here. Having said that, I still think they're a decent team. I just know that those 3-loss SEC schools would have been stronger. So I don't want to say I hate SMU. In fact, I love the quarterback Jennings, and they're going to be frisky with nothing to lose because they did get this spot here. The pressure's a little bit more on Penn State. Penn State's got some similarities to Indiana in terms of Penn State hasn't got a signature win this year. But they took care of business in all the games that they should win. And then Penn State actually looked pretty good in the Big Ten title game. I know you're going to see a 14-point loss to Oregon. It was closer than that. Penn State also has a 1-touchdown loss to Ohio State. Funnily enough, that score probably flattered Penn State. I think that's another game where I backed Ohio State, and Ohio State did cover, but only just, but it wasn't that close. So Penn State, the jury's still out. The knock on Penn State is they can never win the big games. There's something like 0-10 against top 10 sides under Coach Franklin, but that's not the task here. They're not playing a top 10 side. I would lay the 9.5 with Penn. I do think line of scrimmage, Penn State's on another level. So I like 9.5. I believe it's across the board. In fact, some places are still dealing at 8.5. I would look for and lay that with Penn State. Moving to 7 a.m., we have Texas playing Clemson in Austin. Little side note that the quarterback for Clemson, Klubnik, is from Austin. I guess that makes the game more important to him, but it doesn't serve as a factor for me in terms of Clemson keeping this competitive. This is the biggest line of the weekend. It's kind of like a round of 16, even though there's only 12 teams, because 4 are on buys. The winners are going to advance to the quarterfinals. All right, I'll actually keep this short. I think Texas is the best team in the country, so I'm going to have opportunities to talk about them later when I show you my bracket. I'm going to kind of admit that. But just because I think Texas are the best team in the country does not mean I'm certain that they win the championship, because they do have a pretty tough draw and they didn't get a first-round bye. So I'll get to that in terms of how far I see Texas going. Anyone who's going to argue with me is going to say, how can you call Texas the best team in the country when Texas lost to Georgia twice, including at home? And for sure, Georgia got the better of Texas earlier this year. And I was wrong about that game. I liked Texas a lot in that game. When Texas and Georgia played last week, in the SEC title game. I mean, that went to overtime. Texas had killer turnovers. Texas missed multiple field goals. I feel like Texas so easily could have won that game. So I know that people might disagree with my take there, but I'm telling you, if Texas was to meet Georgia again this week on a neutral, Texas would be favorites for a third straight time. I think we get value out of the fact that the Longhorns have those 2 losses. And as for Clemson, it's a quirk in the rules that they're here. It's because of the automatic bid allowed to the conference champions. And the ACC is considered a power conference, but it was the softest of all the Power 4. And Clemson lost 3 games this year. As I say, they kick a 56-yarder to win against SMU. They could have nearly lost that one, and they sneak in. I don't see Clemson as a contender. I know they've been in the playoff like 7 or 8 times in the last 11 years, but they were a powerhouse, Clemson, under Dabo Swinney in several of those occasions, but not this time. So that's actually going to be my favorite line play. And I hate to use the L word, but Texas is close to a lock for mine. I think you can find about $1.25 head-to-head on Texas. What do we see on the screen there with $1.20 with Toppy, but you're getting anywhere from $1.20, $1.25. I'd be throwing that in my multi this weekend. If you're mixing a few different sports in there, take it from me, and then you can let me know about it if I got it wrong. But I'd at least throw Texas in head-to-head. And I'm actually going to endorse minus 11.5. $1.84 on Toppy. I've seen $1.90 on 365. I just think I predicted that line would be north of 2 touchdowns, and I think it's basically a mismatch. I know Clemson Texas maybe without their best offensive lineman, but they missed him as well, Banks, against Georgia, and still very competitive there. Texas is too strong for mine. I think they could quite easily blow Clemson away. So play the minus 11.5 if you agree with me. That leaves us the 4th match and 3rd of the triple header on Sunday. And this is a cracker. Ohio State hosting Tennessee at the Horseshoe. The Buckeyes are 7.5-point favorites. We get Big Ten versus SEC, which is kind of those matchups is what we wanted when we had an expanded playoff, because there's always debate. I'm not sure if anyone argues the Big Ten is stronger than the SEC, but certainly people want to suggest it's on par. And in a game like this, the Big Ten side is going to be heavily favored. And the winner of this game is also gets the joy of facing Oregon next round, which is a shocking draw. If you are watching this as a video, I'll direct your attention to the top left quadrant. Like Oregon is absolutely deserving of the number 1 rank. They're the only unbeaten team. Had a strong schedule, won the Big Ten, did everything right, gets the 1 seed, and they get rewarded with a quarterfinal, most likely against Ohio State. And Ohio State has as much talent in the country as anybody. From what I hear, listening to draft pods, there's 15 plus future NFL players in the Ohio State team. If there's one I can draw your attention to, it's probably Jeremiah Smith. He is absolute box office at the wide receiver position, and they got multiple gun wide receivers. So why are Ohio State seeded 8th? Well, because they lost their final game of the season. They have 2 losses this year, in fact, but one of Ohio State's losses was by 1 point away at Oregon. So there's no shame in that. And watching that game, it easily could have gone either way, right? So an away loss to Oregon, it's a coin flip. That's okay. What's not okay is that then Ohio State goes and loses 13-10 in their biggest game of the year against their bitter rivals, Michigan, in a down year for Michigan, when the Buckeyes were 3 touchdown favorites. And the Buckeyes just went in their shell, lost a couple of turnovers, lost the game 13-10. That meant that Ohio State didn't even get to play in their conference title game. And they were still so strong this year that they still had locked up a spot in the playoff, but it's put them down at 8, and it's put them in such a difficult section of the draw. I guess the interesting thing is, what's the mindset of this Ohio State team? That Michigan game is so important to them. under Ryan Day, the coach, they just never seem to be able to win it. Maybe they have one win over Michigan in the last 4 or 5 years, but it's a crazy statistic that Ohio State, against everyone not named Michigan, they win over 90% of their games. But against Michigan, it's around 20% in the last 5 years under the tenure of Day. So the thing is, that loss was about 3 weeks ago now. I personally believe Ohio State would be over that shell shock. I think the fact that it's an expanded playoff for the first time, if it's a top 4, that loss by Ohio State is the difference between being in the playoff and missing out. But because it's expanded, it gives the Buckeyes an opportunity for redemption, and I think that they can really lean into that because it's unlike any previous year. Now, it's not going to be easy. The problem for Ohio State is that they've got this killer draw, which is not just about Oregon waiting for the winner of this, but Tennessee themselves are no pushovers. The Vols are the best of any of the road teams, I'd say, playing this weekend. They've got playmakers, EMI Lava. The quarterback is a dual threat. The running back is a real problem as well. So that's a strong combination. And I want to draw your attention to Sampson, the Tennessee running back, because that is going to be my favorite prop bet of the weekend. I almost think 365 have got this wrong. So it's a market that's a little bit hidden away. But if you want to check out this prop bet, I'm going to suggest on 365 under college football or NCAAF, they've got most rushing yards in game. So you go to the Ohio State-Tennessee game, and Sampson is $1.90 to have the most rushing yards of anyone in this game. And I love this bet for 3 reasons. One is he is an absolute weapon. He's a workhorse, and Tennessee has a great offensive line. They can run the ball. They will definitely want to do this against such an electric Ohio State, and they will feed Sampson. He's going to get 20-plus carries in this game. His over-under, I've seen varying from 93.5 yards to 100 yards, right? Ohio State are a touchdown favorite, and I do think Ohio State's going to win the game, which would indicate Ohio State would have more rush yards. But the Buckeyes' strength is passing, especially after last game. They went away from what they do best. Chip Kelly said he's going to get back to getting the ball in the hands of his playmakers. So we know Ohio State is going to throw plenty. And what really seals this as such a great bet to me is that even when the Buckeyes do run the ball, they have a two-headed monster in the backfield. Their 2 running backs have run for 750 yards this season in Henderson and 800 in Judkins. So you might get 25 carries between 2 running backs, but it's very unlikely either's going to get more than 15. So it's such a massive advantage to Sampson. I've seen Sampson is $3 to have the most rushing yards of any player this weekend. So do you want $3 about him and whatever yards he has in this game, which I think will be the most in this game, and you've got to hope that nobody else in any of the other 3 games has a big one or, breaks a long one? Or do you want $1.90 just that he has the most yards in this game alone? That's a great play for mine. So that's on 365. And that's going to be another play that I'll officially endorse for this pod. As for the line itself, I did think 7.5 was a little bit steep, but then the more I considered it, Ohio State's so stacked. They've got a point to prove now after getting heaped on with the shock loss. A good team off a bad loss. You know how dangerous that is. At home, again, in the horseshoe. In my eyes, Ohio State is one of the best 3 teams in the country still, on a mission, absolutely can win the national championship. It's just in terms of futures, which I'm going to get to next. I think Oregon is one of the best 3 teams in the country too. But if you've got 2 of the best 3 are meeting in a quarterfinal, and spoiler, my other top 3 team is Texas, who's on the same side of the draw. Can you see that if I remove Ryan's comment? So they've all coming from the same side of the draw. Only one can even get to the championship game. So I'm not really going to just back any of my favorite teams to win the championship at this juncture because they're all got to beat each other and cannibalize each other. So it's a brutal draw, but what that is going to allow potentially is an opportunity to find value on your right-hand side, the right-hand side of the screen, I suppose, to my left, the way you see it. But the other side of the draw is very friendly. So that's the quirk of the draw. We can complain about it or we can try and take advantage of it, I suppose. But my pick there, yeah, a lean to Tennessee with the 7.5 start, but I think Ohio State wins the game. And my favorite player of all, Sampson, the Tennessee running back, to have the most rushing yards in the game. Okay, let's just talk about in general then. Let's talk about overall, because there's 4 teams I haven't really discussed much who aren't playing this weekend because they're on a bye. In fact, I can still probably add to that with my graphics. So let's talk about Oregon, number 1 in the country, right? They had 0 losses, and as I said before, still have this ridiculous path. So I think this is going to be something that they'll fix next year. I don't think the conference champions will get automatic top 4 seeds, and therefore everything would shake out a little bit differently. But it is the way it is this year. I actually, again, I hate to be that guy. I want to admit a couple of games I got wrong this year, like Texas against Georgia. I thought Texas would win both times. But I am actually sitting on Oregon at $9 to win it all from preseason. So I'm kind of really salty that they did everything perfectly, the Ducks, and have such a murderer's row just to get to the championship game. And then you're going to play somebody good who got an easier pathway. So Oregon are $4.50 favorites to win it all. They don't play this week, but it's most likely, because Oregon's been screwed by the draw, it's most likely Oregon versus Ohio State next week. So if it plays out the way I expect, we're getting some absolute crackers in quarterfinals. But as I said, if it goes the way I expect, it's Oregon against Ohio State, followed by Oregon against Texas, followed by a national championship game. So I can't justify $4.50 odds. I think that's light. I'm not even certain if Oregon would be a favorite against Ohio State, because Ohio State was a favorite in Eugene earlier this year, and that quarterfinal, which will be the Rose Bowl, will be at a neutral venue. So look, they've got the best quarterback, which does count for something, Oregon, in terms of best quarterback remaining in the playoff in Gabriel. Oregon will be well rested, well prepared. Lanning is a fantastic coach. They are a lightning fast side, and some of these games are going to be played indoors in domes. Tez Johnson, game breaker. Right? There's nothing I can say to knock Oregon other than their path and the fact that, in my opinion, the best teams in the land are all on that side of the draw. And that might not be an opinion everyone else shares, because other people will argue for Georgia, who have better credentials, but I'm going to pick them apart a little bit right now, actually. Let's go from the most stacked quadrant across to the 2-seed Georgia Bulldogs quarter of the draw, where Georgia awaits the winner of Notre Dame, Indiana. Remember, I said I think the Hoosiers and the Fighting Irish could be overrated. So there's a little theme here. Georgia are $5.50 for the championship. They are the SEC champions, and I want to try and benefit by fading Georgia. When you think about UGA, you will no doubt think this is the team that won the championship 2 of the last 3 years. This is an absolute powerhouse. This is Kirby Smart, right? The thing is, that Georgia team that won, or those teams that won in 2021, 2022, the amount of NFL caliber talent those sides had that has since departed to the NFL is insane. Like, the turnover is insane. And if you have followed the pod for a few years, you're actually going to remember I tipped Georgia on both of those occasions, right? I loved the Dogs at that point. Now they're almost considered like the best of the best in college football, the new sort of Alabama, you could argue. And they did go out and win the SEC, give them credit for that. Can't sit here and say Georgia's bad, but I just don't believe Georgia's as good as everyone realizes. I talked about the SEC title game. I feel like a lot went Georgia's way. You're going to tell me their quarterback got injured at halftime, but it's funnily enough the backup, Gunnar Stockton, actually did really well and posed a different threat. It's with his sort of physical running attributes. And as I record this, it's also tricky because Beck's status for the Dogs is uncertain. I think Well, they've got the bye this week, so we don't know. I think Georgia's keeping that information kind of under wraps a little bit. So we don't know who the quarterback is. I'm not saying fade Georgia because Beck might be out. I'd be happy for Beck to be back in, and then you get even better odds going against Georgia. I just think that this side is not as stacked as they have been in years past. And very impressive win in Austin in the regular season. Other than that, Georgia didn't impress me a great deal. I mean, this Georgia team needed 8 overtimes. You heard me correctly, 8 overtimes to beat Georgia Tech in the final regular season. If Georgia loses that game, they're not, well, they ended up winning the SEC, so they probably still would have got a top 4 seed. But put it this way, if Georgia loses the 8 OT game where they were trailed by 17 at one stage and could have lost in any of the prior 7 overtime periods, then Georgia would have been on the brink of elimination against Texas in the SEC title game. So look, this Georgia team, not as all it's cracked up to be. I believe they will not win the championship. So throw that back in my face if I end up being wrong. But what I really wanted to try and do, and I've been in the lab, is I want to try and find some value in the bottom right-hand quadrant and find somebody out of those 3 sides that can potentially beat Georgia in a semi-final. And that's going to bring me to number 3, Boise State. So what about Boise State? $51. So that's the crazy thing. If you look at the futures odds for the championship, you're going to see, okay, number 1, Oregon, they're the favorites. Okay, number 2, Georgia, they're like 3rd favorite. Okay, number 3, Boise is the longest odds of all 12. Number 4, Arizona State is the 2nd longest odds of all 12. And those teams have a bye. So that's how kind of quirky the seeding is. And we'll get to Arizona State in a minute. Now, I actually am giving Boise State, the Broncos, a chance here. And it's not just because Alex did his college degree, some of you may know, at this university in Idaho. Not a very impressive schedule because Boise plays in the Mountain West. They went 12-1 this year. It was the 70th strength of schedule. So it's easy to knock Boise. But that's similar to SMU. SMU had a really easy strength of schedule. Penn State, Indiana, those weren't tough strength of schedules. And yes, Penn State, Indiana played a couple of teams way tougher than anyone Boise faced, but they lost. So you can still say the Lions, the Hoosiers didn't have a great win this year, similar to Boise. But what Boise do have going for them, along with the fact that you get a first-round bye, is you have a potentially generational running back on your hands in Genty, and went close to winning the Heisman, although Travis Hunter, playing both sides of the ball, very deserving out of Colorado. But in a year where we've seen a resurgence at the running back position in the NFL, or a renaissance, if you want to call it that, the position, I would argue the running back position is even more impactful in college football. And I'm looking at Boise State potentially faces Penn State. I'm definitely picking Penn State in that game. I know that Penn State would be a big favorite. I think Penn State would be at least a 10-point favorite. So I'm not saying Boise would win, but I am saying at $4 odds, I feel like Boise would be a decent bet in that position. And I would like whoever wins Boise and Penn State, I would like them for the value to beat the winner of, let's say, a Georgia Notre Dame on that side of the draw. So a running back that's bloody hard to stop, a fresh team, well prepared, friendly draw. And I've seen Boise as long as 60-1. Like, it's hard to see them winning. They're one of those teams, and if you think about NRL, it's like you get into the finals, and I feel like there are certain teams that get in there that are capable of one upset, but they don't quite have the firepower to win 3 games in a row and win it all, and that's probably Boise. Could surprise people, but if you get 60-1 and they win a couple of times and they're in the championship game, it's very easy to hedge out of that. So hold that thought. I've definitely built Boise a little bit into my custom multi, and I'm going to reveal my full bracket shortly as well. I knew I was just dropping this show on you live, and not that many people follow college football. So look, shout out to anyone who is watching this live right now. If you catch it later as a pod on YouTube, Facebook, whatever, then for sure let me know what you think about what I'm saying in the comments. I really love to chat about it and hear some other perspectives on college football. I've seen a couple of people posting in the group as well, some college football tips. So keep an eye out for that too, because there's plenty of other people sharing plays. I think I saw Luke, and he was sharing plays. I want to say he was picking Clemson and as well as Arizona State for a future. So let's move to the Sun Devils, who are the number 4 seed. A bit like Boise, they shouldn't be here, but they won their conference, Arizona State, and that has gotten them a top 4 seed. Arizona State has not been outstanding this year, but I've enjoyed watching them go. And just like Boise State, they are led by a future pro running back, Scatterbo, such a physical beast, which is really noticeable at the college level. Unlike Boise, though, Arizona State is not on a favorable side of the draw. If I kind of duck out of the way there, Arizona State is going to play the winner of Clemson, Texas, which, as you've heard, I think is going to be Texas. And I think that the journey ends there for Arizona State. So that's the difference between Arizona State and Boise, is Boise doesn't have to worry about Texas or Oregon or Ohio State for that matter. And that's why I haven't got much more to say about Arizona State. I think Texas may be close to a double-digit favorite against Arizona State in a quarterfinal, and I would expect that the Longhorns would advance. So at this point, I'm actually going to reveal my full bracket. I've pretty much talked it through as we've gone, but let me know what you make of this, and maybe you can use this to factor in for some of your bets, or else you can throw it at me if I get it totally wrong. Bear with me one moment. I'll pull up the bracket. So I can pull up a completed bracket, and I've got that behind me now. And then let me see where I can kind of sit to get out of the road of it. Okay, I'm going to sneak all the way over here, but, you know, the cat's out of the bag now. You can see I'm picking Texas to win it all. So how do we digest my bracket? All right, well, one thing you're going to notice, my championship game is going to be Texas against Penn State. So I'm actually picking 2 teams from outside of the top 4, 2 non-conference champions to make the championship game. And I've got Texas winning over Penn State. And I'm going to advise that that's actually a pretty juicy exacta. So why wouldn't I just tip Texas to win the title? As I said before, really confident they roll Clemson. I think you just back Texas to beat Clemson this week, whether they're your lock at $1.25, whether you lay the 11.5 with me, right? I think that's your first play. But I don't think it's great value just playing Texas to win out or to win the whole championship just because of the path. I don't know if sort of $5 odds is strong enough. Now, you know I've got Texas winning. You know I've got Ohio State winning. So there you go. I'm going to pick Ohio State to beat Oregon. Now, that is that quarterfinal that you don't want to miss, that I'm really hoping we get to look at, especially the extra wrinkle that the offensive coordinator of Ohio State is Chip Kelly, was famous and so successful for his run at Oregon, playing against his former school. You know that Kelly's not going to make the same mistakes he made against Michigan if he gets that match against Oregon, and you can't afford to not go out guns blazing with the offense that the Ducks possess. So that would be a coin flip game. Ohio State, Oregon would be an absolute beauty, and it's anybody's game. And as I said, it's worthy of a championship game in my mind. It probably should have been the Big Ten championship game, if nothing else. And in fact, we saw it earlier this year, and it was a beauty, and I think Oregon got up 32-31. So hopefully we get that game again. Not much confidence in it. Of course, as I said, toss of the coin, but I'm going to give the edge to Ohio State this time around. In fact, I'll just side story. It's this time of year. I've come a long way with my punting too. When I began, which is a long time ago, a couple of decades ago, but I made mistakes, let me tell you, just like every punter makes mistakes. And I remember when I first got into college football, and I knew how good Ohio State was, and I saw the betting odds, and I was getting incredible odds about Ohio in this game. And so I've gone, the TAB's screwed up here. And I've had a bet on Ohio, only to realize Ohio is different to Ohio State. and I backed some like little lowly college that, of course, got crushed. I mean, just because I got the wrong team, they could have still won, right? But no, it never works like that. When you accidentally make the wrong selection, you know you're going to lose. So, lesson learned. A lot of these colleges, you have one, private and one public, and it is important which is a state, which is not. So, Ohio State, I've got them getting through to the semifinal against Texas, right? That's another cracker of a game. It's SEC against Big Ten again. Let's talk about Texas a little more since I'm picking them for the whole natty. The knock on Texas, as well as 2 losses to Georgia, is that the quarterback Ewers is not playing that well in the second half of the year, and he's dealing with injuries. He's got the ankle injury, he's got the oblique injury. The ace that Texas have up their sleeve is the nephew of Peyton and Eli, Arch Manning, potentially in packages, or whether Arch Manning just gets cut loose. And if you haven't watched Arch Manning play, he's sort of nothing like his uncles either. He's actually really physical, really fast runner of the ball. So I don't think that's a downgrade if Texas goes to Manning. And I have to believe that the coach Sarkisian will pull the right rein there. The other issue with Texas, Banks, who is the best offensive lineman in the country, may not play this weekend. But for me, Texas doesn't need Banks this week or next week. So I would assume he's back by the semifinal, and I'm going to pick that Texas can edge Ohio State and get through the championship game. Okay, now we go across the other side of the draw. Yes, I did make an argument for Boise at 60-1 as my roughie. But as I said before, I understand Boise would be a 10-point underdog to Penn State, the way I've got it. So I'd predict more likely Penn State gets through. And then you got another mouth-watering quarterfinal. If it goes according to plan, it's Georgia waiting for Notre Dame. That's if Notre Dame wins on Saturday, and they're about $1.30, right? That's another coin toss. That's another beauty. I've said Georgia's overrated, but I don't love Notre Dame either. I explained the unsustainable turnovers. So I'm going to say with that preparation that Kirby Smart, even if it's his backup quarterback, that Georgia's going to progress in that game, which is going to give us that second semifinal of Penn State, Georgia. And that's the game I'm waiting to be able to bet against Georgia. I know that Penn State would be an underdog, but I'll fade the Bulldogs there. And I will say that the Nittany Lions, under Coach Franklin, finally get that big win, finally get that top 10, in this case, top 2 ranked win, and get into the championship game. So it leaves me with Penn against the Longhorns. And as I said before, that would actually be 2 conference title game losers getting through to the biggest game of all. And with that extra time, I'm going to say Sarkisian will have the game plan for Texas. Penn State is so strong on the lines of scrimmage, but that's Texas's strength as well. So I don't think Penn has an advantage there. And one aspect I haven't mentioned yet is the Texas defense is probably the best unit across all of these 12 teams. That leads to a Texas win, in my opinion. That exacta, Texas beats Penn in the championship game, pays $17 on 365 and Ladbrokes and Neds. I think that actually is value if you look at what odds they are to make the title, and then what odds I would predict Texas would be over Penn State in a national title game. I think $17 is actually a really solid price. So let me know again if you come across this and you disagree with my bracket or have any thoughts of your own, or you want to fill your own bracket in and send it in the comments. That'd be awesome. Lastly, to leverage off my predictions as well, I've come up with a custom multi, and Toppy have come to the party. We love that Tristan's willing to do that for us as always. And I've put it here. I'll sneak myself into the bottom corner of the screen so that you can read my custom creation. Okay. At $4.50 odds, I have Tennessee does not make the semis. Now, I've got Tennessee losing this weekend to Ohio State. If by some miracle Tennessee rolls Ohio State, I can't see them getting past Oregon. So it's just such a gauntlet for the Vols. So that's a pretty safe leg. I've got Tennessee to not win 2 games. I don't have them winning 1. Then I've got Texas makes the semi. So in that case, I do have Texas winning at least 2 games. I've spoken about them, my favorite play this weekend against Clemson. And then I think Texas is way too much for Arizona State to handle. Then here's the kicker, and this is where we get slightly juicier odds. I have Penn State or Boise to make the championship game because I'm fading that bottom quadrant, that Georgia, Notre Dame quadrant. And of course, SMU could throw a spanner in the works, but I'm tipping SMU goes packing this weekend. And then I've got the winner of Penn State Boise getting to the championship game. And if you boil them all together, you get $4.50 odds. You can have up to 50 on that with Toppy. It's under gridiron markets right now. And you just got to make sure you get on before 11 a.m. on Saturday, as Ryan joins the chat and says he is on Boise for a couple of dollars. So good luck to you, Ryan. And I think, there's worse wages you can make, especially at this time. Injuries are going to occur. There's random transfers, like Penn State's backup quarterback. I don't love that, but he's just gone off to another team. So let's hope that Penn State doesn't need a backup quarterback. I kind of figure if you're starting QB gets injured, you're not going to make it anyway. But it's still not ideal. But with all this variance and uncertainty, a team that doesn't have to play this weekend does have a bit of an extra advantage in Boise. Having said that, I am picking two teams playing on Sunday, Aussie time, end up in the championship game in Texas and Penn State. And that's everything I had for you guys. So please let me know if you're a casual follower, like hats off to you if you sat through this whole thing. If you know your college ball, then definitely let me know what you think about my predictions and what you reckon yourself. And I'm planning to be back Christmas Eve, guys, to talk NFL and NBA, because we've got like a bunch of marquee games, and I can come up with some of my favorite bets and potentially some custom markets for a bit of fun. For those are all Christmas Day games, but USA Christmas Day games all take place Boxing Day. So that's an awesome day sometimes to get together with your mates, and as well as the Boxing Day test, it's just a smorgasbord of sport on that day. So I want to devote a pod to that if I can find the time next week, Tuesday. I absolutely will. But for now, happy holiday period. Enjoy the action this weekend. And as always, Lego.